A lot of people today are understandably troubled by the inherent contradiction that we had right at our nation's founding. That on the one hand, you've got the Declaration of Independence with its ringing clauses that all men are created equal and they are endowed by their Creator with their unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And on the other hand, you've got a large number of the population who are being denied those rights, who are held as slaves.
Historians can explain this kind of seeming paradox a number of ways. One of the simplest ways is just racism. To say that when Americans declared all men are created equal, they meant all white men, and that they viewed blacks as inferior, so they're not counted as men. And for some people, that probably was true. But I think another important part of explaining this contradiction with this idea of equality and the continuation of slavery is looking at the other parts of the Declaration of Independence. Because declaring that all men are created equal, that didn't win the war. What the Declaration is doing is justifying a rebellion, a resort to warfare, and the right to negotiate with foreign powers. And it's that warfare and the alliance with the French that ultimately wins the Americans their rights. So natural rights are not kind of self-fulfilling. They know that. Equality doesn't matter unless you can defend it on the battlefield. And so someone like Thomas Jefferson, he might say, well, yes, and he does say this, slaves have a natural right to liberty, but that doesn't matter because white people have the right to self-preservation. They have the wolf by the ear, and they can continue to hold those people as slaves.
Some states had it easier than others. With a very small population in slaves, it was relatively easy to resolve that contradiction. But the further that one travels south, the more highly concentrated became the slave population. And therefore, resolving that difficulty is not something that could easily be done, not politically, not legally. And so what you're left with is a compelling moral argument without any way of resolving it. And so the different regions had different ways of reconciling the two. In the northern states, you actually had a concerted attempt in order to raise their laws up to the level of their ideals. In the deep south, you had a somewhat cavalier attitude towards these founding principles. So you had people say, well, with arms in our hand, we're not going to be too nice about the way that we frame our principles of natural right. That's what some members of the Virginia legislature said as they were adopting their own Declaration of Rights. And then even further south, you've got South Carolina, who never took, at least a lot of the members, never took these founding principles very seriously. And therefore, they were in fact arguing against a Bill of Rights to be added to the Constitution because, as General Charles Pinckney said, a Bill of Rights is usually preceded by a clause about all men being created equal, and we would make that claim in very poor grace considering so much of our population is being held as slaves.
The central contradiction around the Declaration and then the Constitution is that the nation was founded on ideals of individual liberty, the rights of individual people, of individual citizens, and at the same time, central to this idea of the rights of individuals to own property, right, and to be in charge of their own destinies, was an understanding that some of that property was property in people. That is, that African people, people of African descent, were understood to be a form of property, not a form of people in the new nation. And so there's a real tension at the heart of these revolutionary ideals and early American documents. This tension between who is property and who has the right to own property. And it's a tension that was never easily resolved. And it's a tension that's understood very well by enslaved Africans and African Americans. We see, for example, during the American Revolution, enslaved women and men escaping to gain their freedom with the British, and understanding very well that this system of slavery, this system of property in people, will hold and become stronger with the advent of the new American nation. We see after the Revolution enslaved men in particular petitioning the state governments, these newly created state governments, petitioning for their freedom on the grounds that they stayed in the United States during the Revolution, on the grounds that they served their masters loyally during the war. For some African American men, they petitioned for freedom on the grounds that they fought on the side of the Revolution, right? That they fought for American freedom. And then they argue, quite rightly, that those ideals should extend to them as well, that they should be regarded as men, as people, and as citizens, not as property.
At the time of the Constitutional Convention, the agreement essentially is that the federal government is not going to do anything against slavery. But over time, slaveholders in the West and the South start to interpret the role of the federal government as being an agent that protects institutions within sovereign states, including slavery. So the interpretation of the role of the federal government in private property changes over time.
The Declaration and then the Constitution work to enshrine an understanding of difference. That is, an understanding of racial difference, an understanding of the permanent difference in legal status between enslaved people and free people in the United States. And the difference rested on the idea that some people would be property for life, whereas other people would be free, rights-bearing citizens for life. And the difference is enshrined in both subtle ways and more explicit ways in both the Declaration and the Constitution. In the Constitution, for example, there's a variety of provisions that directly address the existence of chattel slavery in the United States, and that can be interpreted as working to protect and safeguard and strengthen the institution of slavery. Most notably, we might think about the clause about fugitive slaves that states very clearly that any person who is bound to service is the nice euphemistic language, but which means mainly people who are enslaved in one state cannot gain freedom simply by escaping or moving themselves to a state that does not require slavery, right? So you remain enslaved, you remain legally property, even if you get to a state where slavery is not the law of the land.